Sarah Martinez had always been invisible. Throughout high school, she was the girl who sat alone at lunch, the one whose name teachers struggled to remember, and the student who never got picked for group projects until she was the only one left. Her thick glasses, second-hand clothes, and quiet demeanor made her an easy target for whispers and cruel jokes. While her classmates worried about prom dates and football games, Sarah spent her evenings in the school library, losing herself in books about aviation and military history. Her father had been a mechanic at the local airfield before he passed away when she was 12, and something about aircraft had always called to her. She would sketch helicopters and fighter jets in the margins of her notebooks, dreaming of a world beyond the suffocating halls of Lincoln High School. The popular kids never missed a chance to remind Sarah of her place. Jessica Chen, the homecoming queen with her perfect blonde highlights and designer clothes, would make loud comments about Sarah's worn-out sneakers. "Look, it's the invisible girl," Jessica would say to her friends, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "I bet she'll end up working at the gas station for the rest of her life." Marcus Thompson, the star quarterback with his Letterman jacket and cocky smile, was even crueler. He would deliberately bump into Sarah in the hallways, causing her books to scatter across the floor. "Sorry. Didn't see you there," he would say with fake innocence, while his friends laughed. "You're so small. You blend into the lockers." Sarah's guidance counselor, Mrs. Peterson, meant well but had low expectations. When Sarah mentioned her interest in aviation, Mrs. Peterson gently suggested she consider more realistic career paths like office work or retail management. "Flying is very competitive, dear," she would say with a patronizing smile. "Maybe you should think about something more suitable for someone with your background." Even Sarah's own mother, overwhelmed by working 2 jobs to keep their small apartment, couldn't understand her daughter's dreams. "Planes are for rich people, Mija," she would say tiredly. "We need to think about jobs that pay the bills, not fantasies about flying around in the sky." The worst moment came during senior year when the class was discussing their post-graduation plans. When it was Sarah's turn to share, she quietly mentioned wanting to study aeronautical engineering. The classroom erupted in barely contained snickers. Jessica rolled her eyes dramatically and whispered to her friend, "Right, and I'm going to be an astronaut." Even the teacher, Mr. Davidson, looked skeptical and quickly moved on to the next student. That day, Sarah went home and cried in her room, staring at the aviation posters on her wall. Her father's old mechanic tools sat on her desk, the only inheritance he had left her besides his love for anything that could fly. She picked up his worn wrench and made a promise to herself and to his memory that she would prove everyone wrong, no matter how long it took. After graduation, while her classmates headed off to state colleges or local jobs, Sarah quietly enlisted in the Army. She used her father's military connections and her stellar grades in math and science to get into the aviation branch. Her mother was terrified, her guidance counselor was shocked, and her former classmates barely noticed she had left town. The military was harsh, demanding, and unforgiving. But for the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere. Her quiet determination and natural aptitude for mechanics impressed her instructors. She excelled in flight school, mastering the complex systems of military aircraft with an intuition that amazed her teachers. During her training, she faced new challenges and discrimination. Some of her male counterparts questioned whether a small, quiet woman from a poor background belonged in combat aviation. But Sarah had learned to channel years of humiliation into fierce determination. Every push-up, every flight simulation, every technical examination was a step toward proving that the invisible girl from Lincoln High School was far from ordinary. Years passed, and Sarah climbed the ranks through sheer skill and unwavering dedication. She flew missions in dangerous territories, earned commendations for her bravery, and became one of the most respected Apache helicopter pilots in her unit. Her quiet confidence had transformed into quiet authority, and her fellow soldiers looked up to her leadership and expertise. Meanwhile, back in her hometown, life moved on without much change. Jessica had married her college boyfriend and was working as a real estate agent, constantly posting glamorous photos on social media. Marcus had tried unsuccessfully to make it as a professional athlete before settling into a job at his father's insurance company. Most of their former classmates had remained in town, following predictable paths of marriage, children, and steady but unremarkable careers. The 20-year reunion planning committee, led by Jessica and Marcus, sent out invitations to all the graduates they could track down. They expected the usual crowd of local professionals, a few doctors and lawyers who had moved to bigger cities, and maybe some small business owners. They barely remembered to send an invitation to Sarah Martinez, the girl who had simply vanished after graduation. When the invitation reached Sarah through military forwarding services, she was stationed overseas, commanding a squadron of combat pilots. She had earned the rank of major and was respected throughout her branch for her tactical brilliance and steady leadership under pressure. The scared, invisible teenager was now a decorated officer who had saved countless lives and completed missions that would make most people's hands shake just thinking about them. Sarah stared at the reunion invitation for a long time, remembering the faces of people who had made her feel worthless, remembering the dreams they had mocked, and thinking about the promise she had made to herself in her childhood bedroom. A slow smile crossed her face as she realized it was time to go home and show everyone exactly what the class nobody had become. The Lincoln High School 20-year reunion was scheduled for a Saturday evening in early October. The planning committee had rented out the school gymnasium, decorating it with burgundy and gold streamers in the school colors. A DJ played hits from their graduation year, while a photographer captured staged moments of middle-aged classmates trying to recapture their youth. Jessica Chen Williams arrived fashionably late, wearing an expensive designer dress that she had specifically bought for the occasion. Her husband drove their luxury SUV, and she made sure to park where everyone could see it. She had been planning this night for months, viewing it as an opportunity to showcase her success in real estate and her seemingly perfect suburban life. Marcus Thompson showed up in his restored classic car, his hair thinning but his swagger intact. He had managed to maintain his high school physique through rigorous gym sessions and still commanded attention when he walked into a room. His wife, a former cheerleader from a neighboring school, clung to his arm as they made their grand entrance. The evening progressed predictably. Former athletes compared their children's sports achievements. Working mothers shared stories about juggling careers and families, and everyone tried to one-up each other with subtle brags about their homes, vacations, and professional accomplishments. The conversations were polite but competitive, with undertones of judgment and comparison. Mrs. Peterson, now retired but attending as an honored guest, made her rounds greeting former students. She had aged gracefully and enjoyed hearing about their various career paths, though she secretly noted how many had ended up in exactly the types of conventional jobs she had predicted for them during their guidance counseling sessions. As the night wore on, people began asking about missing classmates. Someone mentioned that they had lost touch with several people, including that quiet girl who used to sit alone at lunch. "What was her name again?" asked a former cheerleader, snapping her fingers as she tried to remember. "Sarah something," Jessica replied dismissively. "Martinez, I think. She was so weird and antisocial. I heard she joined the military, or something equally desperate after graduation. Probably couldn't afford college like the rest of us." Marcus laughed and added his own memories. "Oh yeah, the invisible girl. She used to carry around those old aviation magazines like she thought she was going to be a pilot or something ridiculous. I remember thinking she was completely delusional. Girls like that don't become pilots. Especially not poor girls, with no connections." Their former English teacher, Mr. Davidson, overheard the conversation and frowned slightly. He remembered Sarah as one of his most dedicated students, always turning in thoughtful essays despite being painfully shy in class discussions. "You shouldn't be so quick to judge," he said mildly. "Sarah was actually quite bright. I always wondered what became of her." Jessica waved off his defense. "Being smart in high school doesn't mean much in the real world. You need connections, confidence, and social skills to really succeed. Some people are just meant to fade into the background, and Sarah was definitely one of those people." The conversation moved on to other topics, but several classmates found themselves thinking about the students who hadn't shown up. They had all received the same social media updates and life milestones from each other over the years, but some people had simply disappeared from their collective awareness after graduation. Meanwhile, About 50 miles away, Major Sarah Martinez was completing her pre-flight checklist in the cockpit of an AH-64 Apache helicopter. She had returned from overseas deployment just 2 weeks earlier and was scheduled to participate in a routine training exercise that happened to be taking place near her hometown. When she realized the timing coincided with her high school reunion, she had made a decision that surprised even herself. Sarah had never planned to attend the reunion. For years, she had deliberately avoided contact with anyone from her high school, choosing instead to build a new life surrounded by people who respected her abilities and leadership. But something about the invitation had stirred old feelings, and she found herself curious about how her former classmates had turned out. She had requested permission to make a brief stop during the training exercise, explaining to her commanding officer that she wanted to visit her hometown. Her CO, who knew Sarah's reputation for steady judgment, had approved the deviation with a knowing smile. He had seen enough soldiers over the years to recognize when someone needed to settle an old score with their past. As Sarah ran through her final systems checks, she thought about the 18-year-old girl who had walked across the graduation stage 20 years ago, invisible even in that moment of supposed celebration. That girl had been full of dreams that everyone told her were impossible, carrying the weight of others' low expectations and her own secret determination. The Apache helicopter was a magnificent machine, a technological marvel that represented the pinnacle of military aviation engineering. Sarah had mastered every aspect of its operation, from its sophisticated targeting systems to its powerful engines. She could fly it through weather conditions that would ground most aircraft, and had logged more combat hours than pilots twice her age. Tonight, this incredible machine would serve a different purpose. It would be the vehicle for a homecoming that no one expected, and a statement that would rewrite how her former classmates remembered the quiet girl they had overlooked and underestimated. Back at the reunion, the evening was reaching its peak. The DJ had just announced the last dance, and couples were gathering on the makeshift dance floor. Jessica was holding court near the refreshment table, regaling a group with stories about her recent vacation to Europe. Marcus was by the trophy case, pointing out his old football achievements to anyone who would listen. The conversations had grown louder as people relaxed and alcohol loosened tongues. Old cliques had reformed. Old rivalries had resurfaced in subtle ways. And the social hierarchies of high school had reasserted themselves with surprising ease. It was as if 20 years had passed, without changing the fundamental dynamics between these people. Mrs. Peterson was gathering her things, preparing to leave, when she heard a familiar sound in the distance. As someone who had lived near the local airfield for decades, she recognized the distinctive whir of helicopter rotors. The sound was growing louder, which was unusual since military aircraft rarely flew directly over the town, especially at night. Other people began to notice the sound too. Conversations paused as the rhythmic beating of rotor blades became impossible to ignore. Someone near the window pointed outside and said, "Is that a helicopter? It sounds really close." The noise was getting louder and more distinct. This wasn't the distant sound of an aircraft passing overhead. This was the deep, powerful rumble of a large helicopter approaching their immediate vicinity. People began moving toward the windows and doors, curiosity overcoming their reunion conversations. Marcus, always eager to demonstrate his knowledge, announced confidently, "That's definitely military. Probably just passing through on some training mission. Nothing to do with us." But the sound wasn't passing through. It was getting closer, and the distinctive pitch suggested the aircraft was slowing down, possibly preparing to land. The gymnasium lights flickered slightly from the vibration, and everyone could now feel the power of the approaching machine. Jessica frowned with annoyance. "Well, this is just great. Some military show-off is going to ruin the end of our reunion. Can't they fly their toys somewhere else?" Outside, the landing lights of the Apache helicopter were now visible through the gymnasium windows, casting dramatic shadows across the parking lot. The aircraft was definitely preparing to land, right there on the school grounds, turning what had been a predictable evening into something extraordinary and unexpected. The Apache helicopter settled onto the school football field with precision that spoke of countless hours of expert training. Its rotor wash sent leaves and debris swirling across the parking lot, and every person in the gymnasium pressed against the windows to get a better view of the unexpected arrival. The aircraft's imposing silhouette looked like something from a movie, its sleek lines and military markings making it clear that this was serious military hardware. For several long moments, nobody moved. The helicopter's engines wound down gradually, and the rotor blades slowed their rotation until they finally stopped completely. Emergency lights continued to flash, casting red and white strobes across the gathered faces of the reunion attendees. Everyone was asking the same questions. Who was flying this thing? And why had they landed at their high school reunion? Marcus was the first to recover from his shock. Somebody must be in real trouble for the military to show up like this, he said, puffing out his chest and moving toward the door. Maybe there's an emergency, and they need local help. Good thing I'm here to handle the situation. Jessica rolled her eyes but followed, her curiosity getting the better of her irritation. This better not be some kind of prank, she muttered, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the window. I don't know why anyone would think it's appropriate to disrupt our reunion with military theatrics. The entire group of reunion attendees moved outside, forming a loose semicircle at a respectful distance from the helicopter. The machine looked even more impressive up close, its angular surfaces and weapon systems making it clear that this was a combat aircraft operated by someone with serious credentials. Most of the classmates had never seen military equipment this close, and despite their complaints, they were clearly fascinated. Mr. Davidson, the English teacher, found himself remembering old movies about war heroes returning home. There was something dramatic and meaningful about the scene unfolding before them, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it might mean for their little reunion. Mrs. Peterson stood quietly at the edge of the group, a strange feeling growing in her chest. Something about this unexpected arrival felt significant, in a way she couldn't explain. Her years of experience with young people had taught her to pay attention to her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that this moment was going to be important. The helicopter's cockpit canopy began to open with a soft hydraulic hiss. Everyone strained to see who would emerge from the aircraft, their imaginations running wild with possibilities. Some expected to see a gruff military officer delivering urgent news. Others thought maybe a local politician was making a dramatic entrance. And a few wondered if this might be some kind of movie stunt. What they saw instead stopped every conversation cold. A figure in military flight gear climbed down from the cockpit with practiced ease. The pilot was smaller than they had expected, moving with quiet confidence and obvious familiarity with the aircraft. As the figure walked toward them, removing the flight helmet and shaking out shoulder-length dark hair, everyone began to realize that their assumptions about who might be flying an Apache helicopter had been completely wrong. Jessica squinted in the flashing lights, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The pilot was definitely a woman, and there was something familiar about the way she carried herself. Marcus, who had been preparing to introduce himself as a local authority figure, found himself speechless as recognition dawned. When the pilot got close enough for everyone to see her face clearly, Mrs. Peterson gasped audibly. Standing before them, wearing the flight suit of a U.S. Army aviator and carrying herself with unmistakable authority, was Sarah Martinez. The quiet girl who had been overlooked and dismissed by everyone at this reunion had just landed a multi-million-dollar military attack helicopter in their school parking lot. Sarah walked toward the group with steady, measured steps. 20 years had transformed her in ways that went far beyond physical changes. The thick glasses were gone, replaced by the keen eyes of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Her posture spoke of confidence earned through trials that most of these people couldn't imagine. The uncertain teenager had become a woman who commanded respect in one of the most demanding professions in the world. "Hello, everyone," Sarah said simply, her voice carrying easily across the parking lot. "Sorry, I'm a little late to the reunion. I had to finish a training exercise before I could stop by." The silence that followed was deafening. 60-something former classmates stood frozen, trying to process what they were seeing. The girl they had forgotten, the one they had dismissed as invisible and worthless, had just made an entrance that none of them would ever forget. Jessica was the first to find her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "Sarah? Sarah Martinez? Is that really you?" Her mind was racing, trying to reconcile the timid girl from her memories with the confident military officer standing before them. Marcus looked like he had seen a ghost. The girl he had bullied, the one whose dreams he had mocked as ridiculous fantasies, was standing next to one of the most sophisticated aircraft in the world. She was wearing the uniform of someone who had achieved exactly what she had said she wanted to achieve, despite everyone telling her it was impossible. "I heard you all were wondering what happened to the invisible girl," Sarah said with a slight smile. "I thought I'd stop by and let you know how things turned out." Her tone was friendly but carried an undertone that made it clear she remembered everything about how she had been treated. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Sarah, dear, I can't believe it. You became a pilot after all. You actually did it." The retired guidance counselor was thinking about all the times she had tried to steer Sarah toward more realistic goals. And she felt a mix of pride and regret. "I did more than that, Mrs. Peterson," Sarah replied gently. "I'm a major in the U.S. Army, and I command a squadron of combat pilots. I've flown missions in 3 different war zones, and I've been decorated for valor in combat." It turns out that being invisible in high school was actually excellent training for military reconnaissance. The crowd was still processing this information when Sarah continued. "I have to get back to base soon. But I wanted to thank all of you for teaching me such valuable lessons. Jessica, you taught me that people who judge others by their appearance and background often lack imagination. Marcus, you showed me that people who need to put others down are usually the ones who are truly insecure about their own abilities." She turned to address the entire group. "All of you taught me that the opinions of people who don't know you, or believe in you, don't actually matter. You gave me the motivation to prove that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go, and that quiet determination can accomplish things that loud confidence never could." Several classmates were now crying, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their misjudgments and the grace with which Sarah was handling her moment of vindication. Others were simply stunned, still trying to absorb the reality that the girl they had barely noticed had become someone they could never have imagined. Mr. Davidson stepped forward with obvious emotion. "Sarah, I always knew you were special, but this exceeds even my highest expectations for you. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm ashamed that more of us didn't encourage your dreams." Sarah smiled warmly at her former teacher. "Mr. Davidson, you were one of the few people who treated me with kindness. That meant more than you know. As for the rest of you, don't feel bad about doubting me. I used your doubts as fuel to prove that limitations exist mainly in people's minds." She checked her watch and glanced back at the helicopter. "I really do need to get back now. My squadron is expecting me, and we have an early mission tomorrow. But I wanted you all to know that the scared girl you knew grew up to protect the country and save lives. Not because I wanted revenge, but because someone needed to do the job. And it turned out I was good at it." As Sarah walked back toward her aircraft, the reunion attendees stood in stunned silence. Several people called out apologies and congratulations, but she simply waved and continued toward the helicopter. She climbed back into the cockpit with the same practiced ease she had shown when landing. The Apache's engines spun up again, and within minutes, the powerful aircraft lifted off into the night sky. Its navigation lights disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a group of people who would never again make assumptions about what someone could accomplish based on who they appeared to be in high school. Jessica and Marcus never spoke about that night publicly, but both of them became notably more humble and encouraging when interacting with young people. Mrs. Peterson started a scholarship fund for students with unconventional dreams. Mr. Davidson kept a photo of an Apache helicopter on his desk for the rest of his career, using Sarah's story to inspire students who felt overlooked or underestimated. Sarah Martinez continued her distinguished military career, eventually becoming one of the youngest female colonels in Army aviation. She never attended another high school reunion, but her story became legend in their small town, inspiring countless young people to pursue their dreams regardless of what others thought was possible. The invisible girl had become unforgettable, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple power of refusing to accept other people's limitations as her own truth.